Thank you very much, everybody. They asked me to come out and tell a story, and I said, yes, I will tell a story, but I'll do one thing better. I will tell the story in the form of a PowerPoint presentation. So without further ado, let's do it. This is the Jim Carrey story. I had only been working as a professional comedy writer for half of one TV season, and I now had an Emmy. And that was sufficient for me to get hired on the greatest writing staff in existence at that time. It was a group of geniuses that wrote for this show, The Simpsons. They were all Harvard Lampoon graduates. They were masters of their craft. They had created the show, done 4 seasons of it. It was a giant hit, and I got brought in as the young guy. And I did not know what I was doing. I was surrounded by geniuses, and they were bringing in other young writers, and the writers were being fired around me. I was watching them get fired. Now, I managed not to get fired from this room, largely by using one trick that I'll share with you now. It was the trick of coming up with a joke beforehand, before work, at lunch, after work, writing jokes. And then when I was in the writer's room, I would pretend to be making the joke up on the spot. And just that little element of fake spontaneity made me seem talented enough that they kept me around long enough that I learned the craft of writing. Now, this is the Jim Carrey story. You're quite right to ask, what does Jim Carrey have to do with this? Well, here he is. At this time, Jim Carrey had gone from being a stand-up comedian like Judd Apatow, who would come up through the clubs with Judd Apatow. They were friends. But now Jim had blown up. He'd been on In Living Color, he did Ace Ventura, he did The Mask, he did Dumb and Dumber. He was suddenly the biggest comedy star in the world. He was still friends with Judd Apatow. One day, Judd Apatow calls me and he says, Brent, my old friend Jim Carrey is doing an award show. It's a tribute to Clint Eastwood. And he asked me to come over and riff some jokes with him. And he said, you know, bring over another comedy friend of yours. So Judd brings me. So I know I'm meeting Jim Carrey, the biggest star in the world. What do? I write some jokes beforehand that I can pretend to think of later. So we show up at Jim Carrey's house. It's a fucking mansion, right? And Jim Carrey's at the height of his fame, his wealth, his popularity. He exudes success and talent and charisma. And we walk into his living room, and Jim and Judd just start riffing jokes about Clint Eastwood. And I'm watching them, it's just magical. Riff. And after 20 minutes of riff, finally they turn, they just kind of notice that I'm even there. And they say, what about you, Brent? You got anything? And I say, well, not really, but, you know, doesn't Clint Eastwood have those catchphrases that he does in like the Dirty Harry movies, like, are you feeling lucky, punk? And go ahead, make my day. What if we did some of the other catchphrases that for some reason or other didn't catch on, like, say it, don't spray it. And eat lead, little girl. So Jim does this joke at the awards show a week later for Clint Eastwood. He gets a laugh, and then a week later, he gets offered this movie, Liar, Liar. All right. Now, Jim Carrey's in the position to ask for anything he wants. So he says, first, I'd like $20 million. They say, of course, Jim. Then he says, I'd like a writer to help me rewrite the movie. They say, anyone you want, Jim, anyone in the world. He says, I'd like Judd Apatow. They say he's unavailable. He's making another failed Fox show called Freaks and Geeks. Jim says, give me that other kid, the one who wrote me that joke for Clint Eastwood, right? So I get hired to be the rewriter of Liar, Liar. Now, Jim made one final move. You know, he came from poverty, and he very much liked to do comedy with other people's money in the following way. He said to Universal, you know, the director, Tom Shadyac, he lives in LA, I live in LA, Jim Carrey lives in LA, Brent lives in LA. But I think, said Jim, I think this rewrite would go best if we did it at the Ritz-Carlton in New York City. And so he had them rent out the entire penthouse of the Ritz-Carlton. And I was flown out there, and you gotta understand, Jim, at the height of his fame, could not walk around New York. Every time he would walk outside, people would just come up to him. Oh my God, Jim, oh, Jim, I'm such a fan. Oh, Jim, give me $100, Jim. And he would always give it to them. He couldn't say no. He came from poverty, and he just could not say no to any request. But it bothered him, and he did not like to go outside. So what happened was we fell into this pattern. Here at the Ritz, in this room here, at 10 in the morning, Tom Shadyac would come in, and we would rewrite this script from 10 to 4. And we didn't seem to get anything done. It was just Shadyac pacing around going, I'm very worried. We don't have an ending. We don't have an ending to this movie, right? And then at exactly 4 o'clock, Shadyac would leave. And then Jim Carrey would pull out a joint, that was so big, it looked like Bugs Bunny's carrot. It was like this. And he would light it and take a puff, and it would just disappear, like that. And then he would hand me the little nub of it, and boom, like that. And then I would be as high as I'd ever been in my life. And, you know, for me, the experience of pot is generally to be sort of oversensitized, like all of my nerves are raw. The effect on Jim Carrey was it made him manic. From 4 in the afternoon until Jim went to sleep around 4 in the morning, it was just the full-on Jim Carrey experience for me alone. 12 hours of Jim Carrey at the height of his powers and energy. And it just started and it never stopped. He told me his whole life story. He told me how he came up with this whole act. He said he'd been an impressionist and he would do these impressions, and he started to hate the audience because they would call for these hacky impressions. And so he started exaggerating the impressions, ooh, wow, ah, like this, to make fun of the audience. And they loved him even more. And that was his great breakthrough. And he started getting standing ovations. And then he started dating Linda Ronstadt. Does anybody know that? I never even knew that. He told me he dated Linda Ronstadt, right? And then in addition, you know, there were 12 hours of Jim Carrey mania to fill. He started just doing bits on me, tons of bits. I didn't even know I was in a bit. He would say, Brent, I don't want to do comedy anymore. I want to do vomity. What is vomity, Jim? Vomity is all your favorite bits of comedy with vomit in them. And then he did a dead perfect Who's on First with Abbott and Costello. And it was like it was unspooling in black and white before my eyes, and then the character would just kind of get vomity in the middle of it. It was surreal. At the end of the first night, he said, I have an idea for a sketch, riff with me. The sketch was called The Psych Brothers. And he said, it goes like this. It's 2 guys walking down the street, and one of them goes, hey, my mom has cancer. And the other guy goes, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And this guy goes, psych. And the other guy goes, hey, don't do that, man, because my mom really does have cancer. Oh, I'm sorry. Psych. We riffed on that for like an hour. And then he went to sleep, and I went back to my room, and I couldn't sleep. I was too energized. Just the energy of Jim Carrey just into my brain. I could not sleep. 10 in the morning comes, Shadiak arrives. We got to work on the script. We don't have an ending. Another 10 to 4, no ending, pacing around. Shadiak leaves. Jim brings out the Bugs Bunny carrot. Lights it again. Shoot, boom, hands to me. Pow, woo. Another 12 hours of Jim Carrey. This time he says, have you heard of Nick at Night? I said, no, I've never heard of Nick at Night. It was 1994, right? He says, my girlfriend, Lauren Hawley, turned me on to Nick at Night. We watch a Sonny and Cher episode that's terrible, but it has one good sketch, and then in the writing credits it says Steve Martin. He's like, I think Steve Martin wrote that sketch. He calls Steve Martin. Hey, it's Jim Carrey, call us back. It's the craziest night of all time. At the end of the second night, I remember he went out on the balcony of the Ritz, and he said, look at that. That's Central Park out there. You see it? And it looked kind of prehistoric in the dark. And he said, see that light out there? That's Francis Ford Coppola's place, and that's Woody Allen's place over there, and we're right here. And it just all seems so magical. And then he had the joint, and he dropped it, and it landed on the edge of the balcony, on the outside edge of the balcony. And he said, Brent, hold my leg. And he went like this, boom. And I grabbed his leg, I held onto it. I'm thinking, Jesus Christ, if he dies, they're gonna think I murdered Jim Carrey at the height of this thing. He pops back up with a smile on his face. And he says, were you scared? I was holding onto the balcony the whole time. I always have an out. It's 4 in the morning again. He goes back to sleep. I can't sleep. I think I can't do this. I can't go on. It's just 2 nights without sleep. I find a little bodega like this. Thank you, PowerPoint. It's the only place open at 4:30 in the morning. I walk in there, and there's a guy behind the counter. And he's a young guy, skinny, with slick black hair. And I say, do you have anything that you can give me to help me sleep? And he says in a heavy accent, why you cannot sleep? I say, well, I'm in the Ritz. I'm supposed to be writing this movie. It's called Liar, Liar. And we don't have an ending. And then I just pitch him the entire movie of Liar, Liar. And he says, my name is Mohammed, but my name tag says John. I come from Egypt. I left because my father, he solved all my problem for me. I cannot live this way. And then he tells me most of his life story. And then he says, this movie you are working on, these stories, they are not new. The lawyer, he will get nothing of what he wants. He will not get the car, the money, the success, the fame, nothing. But in the end, he will get love. I said, Mohammed, you solved the ending of Liar, Liar. But how will I go to sleep? And he says, you will go back to the Ritz. You will do the push-up and the sit-up, the push-up, the sit-up, the push-up, the sit-up. You will fall asleep exhausted. Also, you will eat one raw onion. I took the onion, I went back to the Ritz. I didn't eat the onion, but I did the push-ups and the sit-ups and the push-ups and the sit-ups, and sure enough, over time, I fell asleep exhausted. Then I woke up with a herniated disc in my neck. And that is a story of how Jim Carrey broke my neck with comedy. Thank you very much.